All right, hey club members. So this is the third part, the third lecture for Unity. I'll be going a little more into coding. In order to actually master Unity itself as a whole, coding is always going to be a part of this game engine. So I'll be teaching some coding, but we'll also dive into other aspects of Unity like lighting, materials, and things like that. Yeah, and I recommend watching the previous two lectures if you guys haven't already to know where we're at right now. So yeah, let's get started. Last time we were trying to make this game object move. So if I press play right now, it should be moving left, which is in our script called movement. Now we're gonna actually delete this player character. We're gonna completely start fresh. We're gonna right click in this hierarchy, then hover over 3D object, just call it player. It's kind of a placeholder name. Now move this game object up because as you can see here, it's below the plane which is acting as the ground. And something else I want to say real quick is you can rename a game object quickly in this hierarchy by double clicking on this. You can do one click and then that's how you can rename it. Or you can just manually go click on plane, then go where it shows the name of it, and then just name it something else like ground, which is what we want, which is what this plane is acting as. Anyways, what we added last time was a rigid body, which I explained in the second lecture or first lecture as well. And the next thing we want to do is add a script to this. This time, we'll actually have a player movement script. It's not just movement manually. We're going to have player input controlling this game object. So the way we can do this is by pressing add component, and we'll call this script player movement. All right, and press create and add. Now, as you can see, I got two folders here. For the sake of organization, I'm just going to drag this into the scripts folder. Delete this movement script because we do not need that anymore. Now make sure it's in the player uh, game object and simply double click on this. Now I'm gonna be pasting some code I made initially for the player movement, and I'll be talking about every line that you may not understand. So this is the chunk of code I have. Now let's talk about this. Now in the last lecture I did talk about what this public class, what this statement is, because the script is called whatever is before the mono behavior and colon. It's the name of the script, and we called it player movement. And like the earlier script we had, that movement script, it inherits from the mono behavior, which allows it basically to control Unity game objects. The next variable we have here is a public float move speed. Of course, public allows it to be accessible through Unity. This will obviously, I mean, you can tell from the name that it will allow us to adjust the speed of the game object at which we'll be moving it. The next thing we have here is a private vector 3 movement. This is like a way to represent directions in the 3D space, which is the X, Y, and Z axes. And we use this to keep track of where the player wants to move. So it's like based on input from the keyboard, which are these two lines, which I'll explain in a bit. The next thing we have here is the void update method. So like before, this is called every frame, and this pretty much kind of depends on how fast your computer is. Just know that it's pretty much like every second or millisecond that this everything underneath or everything between these two squiggly lines gets called. So these everything here will get called every frame. And this really depends on how fast your computer is. Just know that we'll want to be using update method to constantly check for player input. Now the input part actually comes here, these two parts. So this float move x equals input dot get axis horizontal. This thing is basically, it just means input from the A and D keys or the left and right arrow keys, meaning it will allow you to go left or right, which is how we're editing that movement here. So if we press A, we'll be moving in the x-axis because the parameters the arguments you put in a vector 3, if you hover over it, you can see it's float x as the first argument. So we'll be moving left or right on the x-axis based on this move x variable. The range is from -1 to 1. So if you press A, the number is -1, and if you press D, it's +1. So -1 on the x-axis, and then +1 on the x-axis if you press D. So just know it helps you move left or right. Same with the move Z. This helps you go forward or backward, not up or down. Remember that because we're moving it on the z-axis. If we want to move up and down, we'll be moving instead of move z in the z argument, in the third argument, we'll be moving this variable here, which means if you press W or S, you'll be moving on the y-axis. We don't want that because we're just editing its position on the x and z axis. We'll be talking about jumping motion later, but just know that for now, if you want to move it left, right, or forward or backward, this is how you set the vector3. You will also want this new keyword at all times because we're making a new vector3 that didn't exist before. Keep the y value up and down, which is the up and down 0, and everything else is fine. So the next thing we have here is the transform.translate, and this entire thing, which may seem really complicated, but I'll be going over it line by line. This is a line that actually moves the object. This is all like it sets the variables for that movement, but this thing actually moves the object that this script is attached to. So, of course, movement is the direction where the player wants to move. The move speed also like controls how fast the player moves. Now, this delta time here, I explained this in the last lecture, but it basically ensures that the movement is smooth and not dependent on the frame rate, which is dependent on how fast your computer is. Then this next here, uh, next argument, as we call it here, is called we have space.world. And you can see I have a comma for every new argument I'm putting inside this method. That's how we actually, this is for the coding aspect, but I'm only teaching the Unity aspect for now. Just know that for if you're making a new argument, you'll want to put a comma in this case, which is right here. Let's just say I deleted this. This script would also work fine, but I'm going to talk about why we need this space.world. It basically tells Unity to move the object based on world coordinates, not the object's local orientation, meaning based on where this object is relative to the world, it will be moving in that position. It's going to edit transform's position relative to the world. Now let's test this out. I'm going to save this. Make sure to Control S every time or Command S every time you like write a big chunk of line or a bunch of lines of code. And let's test this out. So I'm gonna press the left arrow key, and as you can see, I'm moving left. Right arrow key moves me right. Okay. Backwards arrow key moves me back and forward. So it is working completely fine. As you can see, we have our player movement. Something else I also want to talk about is you can have child objects. You can actually have the camera follow the player by having it set as a child object of the player, meaning wherever this player game object goes, this camera will follow because it's a child object. So initially it was like outside around like right here. Simply hold this main camera object and then hover over player. Don't go underneath where this line shows up. Don't do that. Just hover over this player itself where it says player. And now as you can see, it has this arrow which can make this main camera pop up. It means that this is a child object of the player. So now the camera should follow the player. So as you can see, it is following the player because the position of the camera is going to be the position of the player based on where it moves. Um, so you can even edit, play around with it. I'm not going to spend too much time on this purely because I want to get onto other things that do not involve coding, but this is just something you can do in your own free time. But yeah, we can expand on Unity. We can expand on this by like introducing more Unity features. For instance, we have something called lighting right here. Well, before that, let's go talk about directional light. So we're gonna right click in the hierarchy. Let's delete this firstly. Now you can see it's completely different without that directional light. But what we'll be doing is adding a new directional light. And the way we do this is by right clicking in the hierarchy, hovering over light and pressing directional light. So this will just illuminate the world and give the player object some, depth and shadows. We can even edit the color to make it look different. Um, and as you can see it has some unique color, which, despite this game object actually being white, it's the light affecting its color that's visible to us. So it's really white, but the lighting is just a different color. If you want to edit the actual game object, uh, color or material is what we call it, then I'm gonna then we will want to go to assets. We're actually gonna right click in the assets folder and we'll be creating something new. You can't do this when you right click in the hierarchy, so you'll have to go to assets folder and right click in where it says assets and then hover over create. Then find where it says material, not physic material. We're going to add a material just to change the color of this player object in this instance. So I'm just going to call this player color. As you can see, it has this, unique ball color. This is just the preview of what your material color will look like, or what your material in the first place will look like. So I'm going to change this to be, let's see, red, orange, yellow. I'm going to change it to be yellow. Now, all you have to do, you can even play around with the properties, um, uh, the metallic part, smoothness. You can do lots of stuff with it. I want to make it look like this. The preview looks amazing. Very, the the graphics are amazing. So I'm just gonna, all you have to do is hold this player color material. Then you can either go in the scene view and hover over the game object as a whole, or go to player game object in the hierarchy. So if we do it here, you can see it does the same thing, and the color is different as you can see. So that is something you can do um, with materials and lighting. Lighting you can do. Uh, you can manage the color, how players will view the scene, or you can just add a new material and change the color of that. If you want to continue editing the material, just go back. But something to note is if you edit the material from here, we're actually editing the game object's material as well because this material is attached to the player. So now that the player can move the object using the keyboard, I've just introduced to you guys like basic scripting concepts as well as some key Unity features like how to, make the camera follow the player or working with lighting or material, things like that. So this part of the lecture should teach you guys how to like connect player input with in-game behavior, which is pretty much a core behavior that we'll be needing in almost any game. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this lecture. Try showing up to the meetings. I'm just recording this for those who aren't able to join these online meetings. You don't have to join the in-person meetings. Of course, that's a little more optional. I still recommend doing it to catch up, find out where we are at. But yeah, that's it.